sign in for me? It's good to see you again. Thanks for being here. Good afternoon, all you beautiful people. Thank you so much for being here today. The Key West Tropical Forest and Botanical Garden really strives to be a community center, so you folks showing up today, talking to about this great new collaboration that we have with the Key West Orchid Society is really, really wonderful. As you well know, the garden is supported by our members and donations, so if you're not a member already, please consider. That goes as well with the Key West Orchid Society. We are all about community. We're all about preserving the history of this natural refuge and wildlife center. If you don't know me, my name is Misha McCrae. I'm the executive director. I've had the privilege of being with this organization for 28 years, where I started as a volunteer. And as I tell everyone, I didn't climb the ladder, I climbed the tree. All right. We are very excited that for 2 years now we've been in discussions and in communications, and we've worked out a collaboration with the Key West Orchid Society. We are very privileged to have Leigh Coolidge here. He's Vice President of the Orchid Society, and he's going to talk a little bit about them and about us and about you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Misha. Welcome, everyone. Another lovely day in the Keys. So I wanted to start with a little story, give you some background on myself. And there is a story, there's a storyline in there. And one thing that I find being involved with orchid societies, new people come in and they're scared to death about orchids for some reason. So I'll tell you how I relate to that with my story. So I was born and raised right outside of Boston up on the North Shore. Had a vegetable garden in the backyard when I was a kid. Learned from a great aunt how to grow things. And have lived in northern New England my whole life. So my orchid journey started maybe somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago in New Hampshire, where we have orchids, but the native orchids up there are not the kind of orchids that you can really grow well in a collection, right? Although people do it, but you've got to have some very specialized situations, setups to do it. But I've always loved tropical plants. My wife Cheryl and I have traveled all around the Caribbean and tropics and whatnot. And so I decided I was going to build a greenhouse. So I built a greenhouse, and it was 8 by 12 feet, I think, something like that, against the side of the house. And started growing bananas and plumerias and pineapples and all that kind of stuff. And one day Cheryl said to me, she said, "Hey, I saw that they're going to have an orchid show. We should go." And I said, "Well, we're not going to that. I can't go to those." She said, "Well, maybe we can figure it out." So we went to this orchid show. It was the New Hampshire Orchid Society show, and it's the largest show in New England, and it's spectacular. It's in 2 big ballrooms in a hotel. It's unbelievable. And I was just agape, right? We ended up joining while we were there. Then we go to our first meeting, society meeting, and it was fascinating, but I don't remember who the speaker was. All I remember is when we were walking back to the car, Cheryl says to me, "What did you think?" And I looked at her and I said, "I think they were speaking in tongues." And so, but here I am, right? So the message is, don't be afraid. It's amazing what you can learn. And for a while I was trying not to learn because I didn't want to get too deep in it, you know? And it's just by osmosis and being around people who understand what the subject matter is, you know? It's amazing. Unfortunately, the smartest person with orchids that I know of, and I know a lot of them now, is not able to be with us today because he's out of the country for a month. And that's Jay Fall, who's our president. Jay is a world-renowned orchidist. When he's out of the country, he's typically in Colombia. His wife is dealing with family business while they're there. While she's doing that, Jay is off tromping in the mountains, trying to see if he can find something that nobody's ever described before. And he's been successful more than once. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to be with us today, so that's why you're stuck with me. But what we're going to talk about here, as Misha mentioned, is that a couple of years ago, the Orchid Society got together. One of our tenets is our focus needs to be education. And we were saying how, other than our meetings where we bring in speakers to talk about things so the members can learn how to grow them, what else can we do besides that that would help us meet our objectives and what we're supposed to be doing as a society? And I mentioned this project that we had going in New Hampshire where we have a conservation committee up there, where they funded a school, a private, it's really a middle school, it's not even a high school, middle school, to raise Cypripedium reginae, which is a really purple, pretty dark maroon and yellow, like a lady's orchid. And it grows in a fen, kind of a marshy, not wet, but just kind of like boggy area. And their teacher, who's a PhD in botany, he got into this so much. These kids are now raising these things and reintroducing them into the environment. The kids speak on their project all around the world. They travel with these kids to speak on it. They're doing a phenomenal job. And I said, we should do something like that. We need to do something like that to be legitimate, you know, to really be doing a purpose that we should be doing. So we kicked it around, and we said we should go talk to the folks over at the Botanical Garden. So we did, and we've come up with a project. So that's what you're going to see today. I will try and explain it to you as best I can. This is not a terrible good start.
Do you want me to help with that?
Okay, so I'm going to start with some real basics, so I hope nobody's offended. People know why an orchid is an orchid? This is a hybrid dendrobium that I just snipped apart. On the way here, let's pass a couple of these around, you can look at them. So one of the key things that makes, there are a few things, but one of the most important, the thing you start with as to whether or not you're looking at an orchid is, what is the flower structure? An orchid will have two petals, a dorsal sepal, two lateral sepals, and a labellum, or what we call a lip. And then the most important part of that is that it will have so we had a conversation in the car on the way down about rules. We have rules so that we can have exceptions, right? Most orchids have male and female parts in the same flower on a thing that's called a column, okay? So if you can, I picked those flowers to bring because I think all those parts are pretty obvious. Some others, like this one, not so much, but they're there. And then the ovaries are down in the flower stem. Okay? I know, huh? I'm not. Okay, so here's some, just kind of some fun facts about orchids mixed in with some things. So they're the second largest flowering family of flowering plants in the world, next to the aster family, which includes sunflowers and all kinds of things like that. There are right now approximately 28,000 named and identified and described species, which means that they have been scientifically described, which is what Jay does in his spare time. New species are being discovered every year as human population grows and expands across the planet. We keep finding new things. A lot of species have multiple color forms. So there may be, the main color form may be a white lavender color, but they also have an alba, which is white. They have a cerulean, which is somewhere between white and the lavender, and some have a rubra, which is a reddish tint to them. So, but it's all the same species, just a different form of that species. Orchids grow on every continent in the world except Antarctica. That's what we know as of today. How heavily have we explored Antarctica? Not terribly, right? So who knows, someday. Orchids are typically epiphytic, which means they grow in air, right? They grow on another plant, typically a tree. It is not a parasitic relationship. It's strictly for structural support. They take nothing from their host. Or they can be lithophytic, which means they grow in rocks, believe it or not. And there is a species that's known to grow and flower underground, and there's another species that's pollinated by termites. So flower color, another interesting thing on flower color in orchids. The flower color is typically, again, rules, always exceptions, typically an indication of what its pollinator is. And I will tell you that white flowers, such as this one, are typically pollinated at night, and it will typically be either a moth or a bat or something that's in the air at night. Okay? Brighter colors, probably bees. There's a family of orchids called bulbophyllum, which are not the most pleasant smelling plants. So, like, literally smell like rotting meat, some of them. So you wouldn't be surprised to say that gets pollinated by a fly. You'd be right. Okay? Orchids have the smallest seeds of any plant. In a seed pod, which I will show you, I didn't have one to bring, unfortunately. I take them off my plants and I chuck them because it really puts some wear and tear on the plant to develop them. When they get pollinated accidentally, I just take them off and throw them out. But I've got a picture. There could be up to 3 million seeds in a seed pod. Orchids, this is another thing that's kind of specific to orchids. Orchids rely on a symbiotic relationship, with a parasitic relationship, rather, sorry, with a fungi in order to germinate and start life. There are 3 million seeds in an orchid seed pod, because if you think about an orchid that grows on a tree, somehow a seed has to land in just the right spot on that tree that it can stay there and have that fungi present in that spot for it to be able to develop into anything. So there are 3 million seeds because the odds are about 1 in 3 million that something's going to happen. So it's pretty fascinating. The other thing is, if you look at your flowers here, if I can borrow that one. When we look at orchid flowers, we look at them like this, and like the picture was up there. That's upside down. Orchid flowers start life like this, all folded up like these guys. And then as they open, they gradually do that. And the reason they do that is because the lobellum, or the lip right here, is the landing pad for its pollinator to get it pollen.
So Leigh, is that every bloom when it comes out it does that, or is it just orientates itself?
They just open them, as they open, they do this, they rotate. Many orchids have aerial roots they can photosynthesize. They photosynthesize through the roots, through the leaves, through stems, everywhere. Some have no leaves at all. Dendrophylax lindenii, common name, the ghost orchid up in the Fakahatchee, okay, has no leaves at all. It's a leafless orchid. All photosynthesis is done through the roots. Orchids are masters of deception. They attract their pollinator by some means. There are orchid flowers that actually look like a certain type of bee, and the reason they developed and evolved that way is because their pollinator is another bee that is that bee's archenis. And that's how they attract that bee, that other bee. Vanilla beans come from a seed pod of a vanilla orchid, and we're going to see one of those in a little bit in the picture. And an orchid plant itself can live for decades if it's in the right spot. And they've probably been around, 83. Some people say maybe as much as a couple 100 million years ago. They've been here a long time. So what's the state of orchids? Last fall, Kew Gardens, which is kind of, I know Lisa knows, Kew Gardens is the Royal Botanical Society in England, and they are kind of like the knowledge of all things botany, right? Is what they are. They're the keeper of the brains of botany. They issued a report, which they do, I think, semi-annually or something like that, on the state of plants on the planet, right? And one of the comments that was in this fall's is that up to 45% of all known flowering plant species across the globe could be under threat of extinction, and orchids will bear the brunt of that. Most likely because habitat destruction and because people just can't keep their hands off. Closer to home, according to the University of Florida, Florida has at least 106 native species of orchids. 58 of those are listed as endangered. 18 are threatened. Here in the Keys, when the railroad was built, there are pictures. I couldn't find one online anywhere, but I saw a picture. I think it was at Pigeon Key, if you've ever been up there at the camp. I think there's a picture. That's where I saw her. There was a picture of a boxcar on the train, and it was full of orchid plants that they had ripped out while they were building the railroad, and they were taking them up north to sell them. And the last remaining known native orchid population down here is probably just, there's maybe 4 or 5 that are actually still here, compared to what were probably here even 150, 160 years ago. So, and they're ones that have survived because we're fortunate that we have some places down here that are pretty remote and hard to get to. And that's the only reason they're still here. Right? So this raises a question. Is there anything that can be done about that? So in our discussions with the garden, the reason that we decided to do this is because both the Key West Orchid Society and the Botanical Garden, our vision statements are they're almost identical, aren't they, Misha? Yeah, they really are. And so, there's the gardens is preservation, development, education, historical significance, and ours is to enhance the knowledge of orchids and their culture in the unique environment of the Keys, right? Because it is a unique place to grow anything down here. And so we've really got a great organizational fit to do something important. One of the other things that is going to make it, I think, has an opportunity to make it on a grand scale, is that the mission statement for the Botanical Garden is not just the Keys. It includes the Keys and all of the Caribbean Basin. So, you know, the handful of native orchids that are in or used to be in the Keys can now expand to well over 1,000 different species of plants by doing that. So it opens up all kinds of possibilities of things that we could grow. And what we're gonna do, the bottom line is, we are in a collaboration with another partner, which is Fairchild Botanical Garden up in Coral Gables. Several years ago, they started a program called the Million Orchid Project. They are raising orchids, giving them out to cities and towns and schools, and having them put the orchids on trees and playgrounds and city parks and things like that. And trying to restore a lot of the native orchid population that used to be in Florida. They have offered to help us. They were excited because they had nobody in the Keys doing anything. So they were like, yeah. So this is what we're going to embark on. So what the Million Orchid Project does, I just explained some of it. Another important part of it is education. They are working with schools, with teachers, with students, and they are getting those folks involved in some of the science of how you grow this. This is a first-class science project is what we're talking about. So they have over 20 different community partners, 100 schools. They have taken an old school bus, completely refurbished it, and it's now a traveling lab. So think of the Bloodmobile, right? Except in there, they have equipment to create sterile environments, because that's what you need to do this, to keep parasitic stuff out of what you're trying to grow. And they can take the bus to the school so the kids can do the science, the lab work in the bus, and everything. It's a great, great thing. So how do you do this? So the first step is pollination. And I will tell you that our last year, Jay pollinated a plant called Encyclia tampensis, which is fairly common down here if you know where to look for it. This is Encyclia tampensis. It's got some spikes starting on it. It blooms late spring, late summer. What you have to do is you have to use like a toothpick. You have to pop the anther cap off, which is the part up inside on the column. You can see at the head of the column. Pop the anther cap off, and inside you get the pollen. And all you have to do is touch it. A lot of orchids are really fun because all you have to do is touch that anther cap, and it literally just springs like it's spring loaded. Because that's when the pollinator touches it. The plant needs to get that out of the way because that's been protecting the pollen. But once it's touched, you get it out of there so that the pollinator can get in and get the pollen. Then the pollen is transferred to another plant, and because it's super sticky, it gets right in there and sticks. And then this is what develops over time. And you know within a few days whether or not you've been successful getting it to take, because the flower that's there that you pollinated will turn brown and shrivel up like that, and it will never come off that seed pod. Most flowers, when they start to die, they start to turn brown and eventually they just fall off. But if it's been pollinated and the seed pod's developing, it won't. And the seed pod develops back in the stem where the ovaries are, right? So that's what this used to be the stem of the flower. So this is what the inside of a seed pod looks like. It can take anywhere from like 3 months to a year for this to mature and dry. And the trick with this is that when they reach the point where they're dry, they pop and the seeds go everywhere, right? So the trick is, when you want to do it in the laboratory so that you can maximize the germination rate, you have to time how close is this to going off there and try and get ready to do it before. So you have to sterilize everything. You have to sterilize the seed pod. You have to sterilize all of your equipment. These bottles in the back here are, I forget what the term is, I just got a flask. Different glass or plastic containers that have been sterilized, we call them flasks. The black stuff in the bottom is what's called agar, which is basically a solution. It's like thick Jello, kind of. And it's made, typically it's an algae-based kind of a thing. And what that does is that takes the place of the fungi that in nature would nourish the plant to be able to start life. And nourish the seed to be able to start life. And that takes the place of the fungi in providing that for the plant. And it has to all be done in a sterile environment so that you don't get all kinds of other things that you don't want growing in there with it, which probably would end up with the same result as the 1 in 3 million ever being able to germinate, right? So this process was developed, obviously, for commercial purposes, right? So the people that sell orchids need to have hundreds and thousands of them, right? Think about all those failing ops at Home Depot and the grocery store, right? So the next step is we have success, we have something growing. And these are kept in a clean room. I forget, I think it might be 10,000, class 10,000 clean room, doesn't matter. But they're kept in a clean room. They have grow lights, so to help them grow. And so this part right here takes up to 6 months to start to see something happening here. And then the point they are here is at least a year, closer to a year and a half probably. And you can see it's all, you know, the flask there is all sealed up. And between here and here, there will be multiple repottings as they grow, because they're gonna get too crowded in there. So you go in the sterile environment under a hood, cut out a piece of the agar with the plants on it, put it in a fresh one, like that, where it can have more room to grow in there. So you started with 1 flask, and then now you're in 5 flasks. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually it goes into something that we call a compot, or a community pot is what that stands for. Where you're gonna let them grow to the size close to what you want until you divide them into individual small pots like that, okay? So that's another year. Anybody keeping track? Yeah. This is why we've taken 2 years to figure out what we want to do. So here we are, 2 years after we put the seeds in the laboratory. We've finally been able to move them out into shade house or greenhouse where we're gonna grow them out, right? They will be there for another 2 years. So, what are we gonna do? What's our focus gonna be? What are we gonna pick to start with? These are the 6 plants that we have decided, for different reasons, that we are gonna start with to grow and repopulate into the botanical garden. They are Encyclia tampensis, Brassavola nodosa, Brassea caudata, Epidendrum nocturnum, Certipodium punctatum, and Vanilla barbellata. Like I mentioned earlier, there are thousands that we can, at least 1,000 species we can do eventually. So this is a project that can just be perpetuated forever, probably, right? It can just be an ongoing thing. So, Encyclia tampensis. I have one here. This is what it looks like. Its common name is the Tampa butterfly orchid. That's where tampensis comes from. It is an epiphyte. It grows on trees. I'll show you a picture in a minute. It grows from Florida to the Bahamas. It blooms late spring, mid-September. It's a fairly low light plant in that it grows, I'm going to tell you, this is a secret. If you're ever looking for them in the woods, most of our hurricanes, the wind is either from the east or the west. Right? These grow on the north side of the tree.
That's interesting.
Because it's protected there. But don't tell anybody I told you. Therefore, it's a lower light. Okay, it's a little lower light. The flower's about, about that big around, something like that. And they're kind of fragrant. They're neat. And they call it the butterfly orchid because they're on a fairly long spray, like these guys are. And the wind blows, they just kind of dance around. I'm gonna let you folks pass this around. Do me a favor, just hold it by the pot here because there are some flower spikes coming on it. Most of them are way down in, but a couple are starting to come. So this one is also an Alba variety. On the Alba variety, the petals and sepals are all kind of a mint green color, and there's no purple in the lip, it's just white. So it's green and white instead of that color. And here it is. Pictures that I took, that's actually my hand. In nature, when we're growing them in pots, we always like to clean them up when the flowers have gone by. When the bud spikes have gotten brown, we snip them off so the plant looks pretty. Now, the plant doesn't do that. You can see all the old flower spikes on this, just hanging down all over the place like part of a bale of hay or something. But, nice healthy, there are some nice healthy colonies, but tampensis is still down here. And these grow primarily, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not sure about this. They typically, I find them on these scraggly trees that have this really, really rough bark that has almost like a charcoal color in it. I think it's black mangrove. I'm not sure, but I think that's what it
It
is.
is black buttonwood. Buttonwood has a real deep roots.
Maybe.
Buttonwood, that's what it looks like.
You think it's mudwood?
I think so.
The green buttonwood.
The next one is Brassivola nodosa, which is this guy here. I will not pass that around. Would you want me to come look at it? Think it needs to be repotted?
Yeah.
Common name is Lady of the Night. It can be either epiphytic or lithophytic. Ranges from Mexico south to Brazil and includes all the western islands of the Caribbean, basically. So it's a west end of the Caribbean, Central South America plant. It blooms best in the fall. In the fall, this plant right here had probably 300 flowers on it. But it always has flowers on it, all the time. It's always got some flowers on it. And at night, as soon as it starts to get dark, it smells amazing. To me, everybody's senses are different, right? It's citrusy smell, like similar to orange blossoms and lime blossoms and stuff like that. But it just, we have a big screen porch, right? To keep flowers away from the iguanas, as soon as the buds start to form, we bring them up on the porch, and all the places set up. As soon as it gets dusk, when that thing's up there, it gets into the house, it smells amazing. Really cool plant. And they're tough as nails too. And there is nodosa in a tree in Mexico. And they grow fairly high up in the tree. The next one is Brassia caudata. That particular one is the yellow variety. This one here is more of a green and white, but it's Cordata. It's an epiphyte, grows on trees. There is native Cordata in Florida, and that also goes all the way down to Brazil and all the way through the Caribbean. Blooms twice a year, again a lower light plant, a little bigger flower, and sometimes there's a little fragrance that comes out of it, but not too much. And there's how they grow in nature, up in the crook of a tree. Epidendrum nocturnum. I do not have one of these. I have a different kind of epidendrum. It's called ciliary. It's very similar. Its common name is the night-scented epidendrum. It's an epiphyte, grows in trees. Again, Florida, South America, Caribbean. Another one that's like every time it blooms, it's all you can smell. It's amazing. And that's more of a jasmine smell to me. And that's how they grow. Okay, so we just looked at how many? 4 of the plants that we're gonna do. They all grow in trees. Does anybody notice anything that's different about all of them?
Leaf structure.
Leaf structure's different, and the stem, and the whole body of the plant's different, right? The whole body of the plant's different. The epidendrums have kind of a long, thin, pencil-like kind of a growth that the leaf comes off of, and then the flowers come out of the leaf apex and all of that. You look at the tampensis, it's got little what we call pseudobulbs, because they're not really bulbs, but the function of those bulbs is to store food and water for when times are lean, right? It gives them a better opportunity to do that. So that but those don't have that, right? So what that tells you is that that plant, that epidendrum, grows in a wetter environment than that Encyclia tampensis grows in. Because that has evolved to the point where it knows it's gonna have spells where it better have some water stored or it's gonna be a trouble. Okay? And then, in between, you've got the brassia, which has big, wide, broad, thinner leaves. They're still pretty substantial, but they're thinner. And the bulbs are kind of mashed looking bulbs, right? And this is just a tangle of roots, right? So that's, if you were just looking at plants, but if you look at plants hard, you start to see things that you say, I wonder why that is. So this one is the one that I picked as my favorite for this project. And this is Certipodium punctatum. This is the one that went out in boxcars when they were building the railroad. It's occasionally terrestrial, but it's epiphytical by nature. Also known as the cow horn or cigar orchid. Has great big fat pseudobulbs on it. Blooms in the spring. It was native here at one time. It grows right out in full sun. I'm picturing a whole bunch of them around the pond up there, right? And they get huge, like huge. There it is. Look how big these pseudobulbs are. The green ones in here. They're massive. These are the green ones are the new ones. The brown ones are the old ones. And you'll notice that the flowers are coming off the old brown ones, which is not uncommon. So you never cut old canes off. Last one is Vanilla barbellata, which is also known as the snake orchid. We have a fair amount of it in the Keys down here. You might not notice it. It looks like a green vine growing on the ground. Occasionally it'll go up and around a tree and up across and down. Blooms late spring to summer, right out in full sun most of the time. 2-inch flower, again, another nice fragrant plant. And I'm pretty sure that looks like big pine key to me.
Yeah.
There it is. Some people might actually mistake it for cactus even.
The snake cactus, right? That
Hmm?
would be the snake cactus, very much similar.
So what are we gonna do? We know who we're gonna do it with, we know what we wanna do, we know how to do it. Now, what's the process gonna be here? So the plan is we'd like to start 2 to 3 new species per year in the lab, so that we've always got some new things coming along. We are going to erect and equip a shade house on property here. We picked out a site right over here next to the shade house, the Botanical Garden shade house. It'll make it convenient to run water, electricity, things like that. Our first 3 pods of Encyclia tampensis hopefully will be here by the end of next year. And then we'll be able to start transplanting plants into the garden by 2027. We plan to do our own breeding, so we could offload a lot of this stuff, like Fairchild right now is doing our lab work. They've offered to do other seeds for us, plants they can collect. One of the things that we think we need to do, something may happen to change that along the way. We want to make sure that we are breeding plants that are genomically, is that a word?
Yeah, it is now.
Got lucky. As near to the native genome of plants that would have been here as we can. Because that, coupled with raising them from small seedlings in a shade house here, will help us, we hope, ensure success of putting them off on their own, right, out in the garden, that they'll do
So
that.
how are you going to
They're-
examine the genome?
So you do DNA testing, and Fairchild has offered us that they would be happy to do that for us,
Okay.
because they thought that was a brilliant idea. So that's the plan with that. You know, dendrophylax lindeni would be a lot of fun to do, but they're brutally hard to grow. They are really hard. Before we get into anything like that, we gotta make sure that we know what we're doing, right?
And we gotta find what works, right?
And, you know, so part of this whole thing, and I think there's a note in here at some point is, so once we've got them growing great over here in the shade house, we're still not done, right? Because we gotta find just the perfect spots out in the garden where they're gonna wanna be. So that's one of the other things we're gonna do. We're gonna do survey the whole garden. What about this spot? What about that, in that crook of that tree right there? Could we grow this there? Could we grow that there? Light meters, all kinds of stuff, right? So we got a lot of stuff to figure out. This is an example of the type of shade house we're looking at. It's gonna be about 40 by 24 feet. It'll have, we're between 60 and 70% shade cloth, probably somewhere in there. We're gonna have another discussion with Fairchild about that. But a structure that size will hold up to almost 21,000 seedlings, 2 by 2 inch pots. So that'll hold a lot of orchids. The estimated investment of $35,000 to $40,000 includes all of the equipment, the shade house, putting it up, doing the water, doing the electricity, fans, lab expenses, and that will get us through a few years, a few iterations of this process. We will do that. Because there's a lot of things involved in this. We've got it all planned out, we've got it all laid out, so we've made good progress. This is what the floor plan is gonna look like, with benches up and down, hopefully the stainless steel ones that you see in big greenhouses where they have lots of plants on them and stuff. Those are good sized benches. So that they can withstand the environment down here. So why are we doing this? Because we're crazy? Well, that doesn't hurt. I will tell you Jay's comment. When this came up in the meeting, Jay was like, "You are out of your minds." That was Jay's comment. And guess what? Now he's like, "What are we doing?" So, So, you know, we're lucky that we have this opportunity because we've got two organizations that are very, very closely aligned. And it's an ideal, the gardens here are an ideal site to start that. You know, we've got freshwater ponds here, which are kind of hard to find in the Keys, right? Which is that freshwater humidity is important to orchids and all that. And it's a protected area. We've got a lot of different kinds of species of trees here that we can experiment with to see what grows on what. And it's just, it's a great opportunity. Like I said, there's, you know, at least 1,000, if not more, different species that fit the Keys and Caribbean Basin Charter. We've got the successful model of Fairchild Million Orchid Project to follow, which is great. And they're psyched that we're doing this down here. They can't wait for it to really take off. Looking way down the road, you know, which is really what you should do. It's good to be here, but you gotta keep in mind, you know, what could we do? What could happen? You know, if we had 100 different orchid species all living happily in the garden here, I think Nisha would be getting visitors from around the world.
Well, we get them from around the world already, but I think, yeah, this would be definitely a cornerstone.
And I think that the Botanical Garden here, and maybe the whole city of Key West, right, could really have a unique collection to brag about. It's also, don't lose sight of the fact that it's a great opportunity for us to engage younger generations, right? It's important to get kids interested in stuff like this. And it's a legit STEM project. I mean, this is like hardcore science, right? Working in the laboratory in a sterile environment, and don't touch that, you know? And let them ask why, and you can answer it.
Or is the Board of Education from Monroe County, have you guys
No,
approached them yet?
no. We wanna make sure we know what we're doing first. But it's
Would
part
it
of,
also be a STEM project at the college level?
it could be college, could be middle school. Could be
Why
high
not?
school.
All of those questions is
All
why not?
All of the above, right? As long as they've got the equipment to be able to do it. And even if they don't, Fairchild will probably come down with the bus.
So the tropical forest and botanical gardens here
Mhm.
in Key West, would you be looking to repopulate these orchids of Keys?
Yeah. So following the Million Orchid Project model, which is they make plants available to schools to use to populate parks in towns, schoolyards, all that. The plan eventually, hopefully, would be that we're successful enough and we've grown enough of these things, that we could do the same thing. That the trees in Key West can have orchids in them, not just at the Audubon House or the Hemingway House, right? So what's next? We have started doing grant writing, which is always fun, isn't it, Misha? The good news is we are aware we have multiple opportunities, both local, state, and nationally, where there are people we think will be eager to help us with this. As I said, we're already currently engaged with Fairchild. They've been great help so far. Just giving us advice, somebody to talk to that's been there, done that. And throwing out our first seed pods for us. We're gonna start beginning permitting, site prep, procure all of our capital equipment, and get going on the shade house hopefully by the end of this year. Like I said, we need to do a thorough site plan of the garden sometime in the next couple of years to figure out what plants might do well in what specific, on what specific tree, on what side of what tree, how high, all that kind of stuff. And again, to your question about whether or not we could do it beyond the garden, is that bullet down near the bottom there, right? We need to begin some local fundraising, stay engaged with Fairchild, and just kind of like, all we gotta get this brilliant idea, we just gotta do it, right? We did the hard part. So, off we go. That's Fairchild's bus, right there. That's the stem of it. And, anybody have any questions? No questions? All right, so here's how we're gonna end this. These things are really hard to pollinate. The pollinator is way up in the back end of this flower, and I can't even see it with my glasses. This one might be a little easier. If anybody wants to come up and try and pollinate one of those. Anybody want to try it?
I did have a question. So, you see from the north and going perennial, it's perennial big day.
Yep.
It's slow.
Yep.
I don't need that much question.
Yeah. See this one's gonna get, if you come to the Orchid Festival next year, you can buy a piece of this. You know how I do my really big ones? I won't have to do it with this, I can bring it up in my hand. My really big ones, like that Certipodium, the cowhorn orchid, I don't have one of those, I'm trying to find one. I have some orchids that get huge. My Sawzall looks great, they get. The only thing you have to do is make sure you get a sterile blade, so put a new blade on it, and you'll be amazed. The first time I saw somebody do that, I was like, what?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you have sterilized blade, do you get a new blade every time?
Yeah,
or do you
every plant.
Every plant. So you're not putting running alcohol.
Not if it's a new blade, you don't have to. But if you get an old blade, you could do it with alcohol. So my bench that I work on, I have an old fish table that I use for my potting bench. Just spread a little alcohol after everyone wipes it out with a clean cloth.
Okay.
Right over here, Leigh.
A lot of times when I'm walking, and especially in Old Town, I see orchids that are kind of taped on to trees.
Sure.
Is that like an appropriate way to?
It's a way.
What a
It's
way?
a way.
What is the appropriate?
So the most effective way and least problematic for the tree itself is to use a big gob of liquid nails. Kind of spread it out with a stick a little bit, however big you need it to be. Give it about 5 minutes to set up. Take the plant you're gonna do, stick it on there, and it should stay. And it will just hold it right there until the plant has had a chance to put out new roots and grab on by itself.
Really?
Yeah, if you use like zip ties and stuff,
I see
within a
some-
year, make sure you get them off of there.
Right, it's like with line.
People who use nylons, I don't know where you get them anymore, but. But again, that's the same thing, you can't leave it there forever, you're gonna damage the tree.
Yeah.
I used to sell from tape.
If it's a small plant, if it's a fairly small plant though, the liquid nails works great. And eventually it just dissolves off.
Right back here.
I have a question. I'm moving, and I'm going to try to take some of my orchids with that are on the tree.
Yeah.
Is there a way I can try to remove them? Just get them really wet, or what should I do?
All right, we have a question going on in the
So
back.
I mean, you can get them really wet and try and, with your fingernail, try and one root at a time. I mean, that's what I have to do when I unpop that thing. I've got to get it soaking wet and then go all the way, it'll take me an hour to get it out of the pot.
I wanted to try to rescue it.
Wonderful. Leigh, if I may, just to follow up some of what Leigh was presenting to you, credit goes to where it's due. I have been trying to get our orchids identified for 15 years. And finally, Frank with the Orchid Society came to me and said that the Orchid Society needs to get more serious with conservation. If you don't know it already, that's what this organization and this site is all about. We have over 270 native trees. We listed at augment.org for our collection of hardwood trees we have in the garden. We don't have just a type of water, we have 3 types of fresh water. We have the, what we call our Northside Pond. This is originally, y'all remember when this was called Stock Island? Does anyone know the story? There was a pond here, and in the 18th and 1900s, the people left their livestock here, and George said to Eunice, I'm going to Stock Island and get the mules. The goats, the sheep, the horses, everything was kept here. 1948, the Navy came in, took the property, filled in the pond. 2006, we went with the Florida Community Trust, and they helped us raise $4.6 million to buy back this part of the property that was a garden. And then we worked with the South Florida Water Management Company District for $2 million grant to reinstate the original Stock Island pond. That's what you're seeing out there. For funds, go out to University of Florida Great Lake Watch Program. We are listed on there. It is monitored monthly as 100% fresh water, because we are the largest body of fresh water south of Florida City. It's considered a lake, and I still laugh about it. But the fact is, we have 12 feet of fresh water here. Over on the east side, Davian Pond is your example of other ponds, Geiger Key, Big Pine Key, Blue Hole. It's brackish. It actually goes up and down with the tide and everything. What we have discovered, it was the University of Michigan that helped us with it. There's 12 feet of fresh water on top of Davian Pond, because fresh water is lighter than salt. And then it goes down 30 feet of salt water. Because of that, it's its own special habitat, because more than likely you're going to see your saltwater birds back in Davian Pond, but you're going to find your freshwater birds here. But the fact that we do have these water sources, and the third one is we have a kayak landing right there on the channel, so we got all saltwater. Because of the fact we have these resources here, the latest count, and Christina's our board member, thank you so much for being here today. 223 species of birds have been identified in this garden over the past years. Why? Because it's like going down the interstate and we see truck stop, a place to rest, drink, you got something to eat, and then go about your journey, right? So that's a key component that's important. The main thing in the message that aligns us so closely is conservation. If we cannot protect what's around us, is my only soapbox speech, I promise you. If we cannot protect what's around us, we cannot protect ourselves. And with the scientific fact that over 200 species still go extinct every day, mankind doesn't think it's in the line somewhere. We really need to rethink that. So protecting what should be here and what could be here, and educating the importance of it is really both of our missions. Whereas they're more on the orchids end, they are on the orchids end, we are on the native flora and fauna of the Keys, Cuba, and the Caribbean. That's because now we have 545 species of plants that we can identify and introduce you to here at the Botanical Garden. We want to set the precedence because this has not been done down here. One of the things that we got from the Fairchild Tropical Gardens, and Leigh was there when we talked about it, is they've been trying to get a foothold in the Keys with their Million Orchid Project for over 8 years. And guess what? We just opened their door. And because of the fact of the length of time that's required, they can be doing things setting up for us, so by the time we have the infrastructure, the actual building, then we'll be able to start in what we want to do here, and we're very excited about it. Education. You ask the question about STEM education, that bus answers it all. Fairchild Garden's going to come down here with their buses. They're going to start in Key Largo, and they're going to come all the way down to us, eventually, right? But that's the whole concept, because once again, we opened the door, and I'm very excited with this. I feel, and I'm really excited about this because this is a win-win-win project. It's a win for the Botanical Garden because we are very lacking and we do not have any expertise in native orchids. It's a win for the Orchid Society because they really want to be serious about conservation. In fact, it's one of the only things that we really had to negotiate is that we will not have those big China ornamental orchids here. We're natives, that's what we're about, and as long as they're happy with what we can come up with, we're gonna build it up, educate you folks, we're gonna ask you to come in and help us do the project, and then when we got to the point when we have the 2, 3, 4 orchids that we want in the collection, we got a couple extra, and we can offer them to the public. That's where our native nursery started from. If you've been around for a while, we opened the native nursery in 2010. My board almost fired me because they said, what do we need a nursery for? You got more important things to do. And I kept saying, you know, a garden without a nursery is like going to a restaurant without a kitchen. Really doesn't make sense. So we started with 4 plants, and that's what we're working on this business plan too. And the 4 plants, the idea of the nursery is to have a backup species for every plant that's in here, right? Every species of plant. And if we have a backup to back up, even better. And I can tell you, it came into fruition in 2017 when we lost 196 trees from Hurricane Irma. Our nursery replanted 130 in the garden. They're all specimens at this time, right? And then the fact is, you know, as that grows, then once again, we can talk about what we can offer the public and do orchid shows and so forth. We are working connections through the Education Partners of Living Lab with the Monroe County School District. They just started a new agricultural platform within the school district. We're working with them, and not on this yet. We put the fish hook out there, right? We planted the seed and say, guess what we can offer, and then we can be able to grow into it. Because ultimately, that's what our mission is, to educate the importance of. And that's going to be our efforts to do all of this. Why are we talking to you about it? We want you to get excited. We want you to see that we have a vision of the future, and we want to see if we can get your support. One of the first things that are going to be is the foundation. We got to build it. But I keep preaching to everyone, just like the rest of this garden, if you build it, they will come, right? And that's the whole concept of it. And I'm actually betting my back pocket on the fact that when we start talking that we're doing an orchid program at the garden, people are going to be lining up because they really want to know more. And if this actually helps our habitats, you know, now in life we don't have big properties like this for wildlife. Micro habitats are becoming the norm, because if you don't have one restaurant to the other, then these species don't have a chance to live, right? And anyone that's interested, and I'll just throw it out there, if anyone wants their name on the Orchid Conservation Day, you know the number. You know the number. But donations appreciated. Please give to the Orchid Society. If you believe in programs like we just offered today, outside of that, become a member, donate to the garden. You can put in there, I'm donating you because I like the speaker series. I like the education. And the same thing goes with the orchid. Earmark your dollars for the Orchid Conservation Project. And we have a reserve account that we put all that money in, because once we get all this electric and irrigation and we got that number, then we can write that grant. We can go to the people and listen. When we go to our grantors and our funders and so forth, the interested party, and say we've already raised, they're more likely to jump right on you. Okay. Any other questions? I'm excited y'all are here. Thank you. This is a quick questionnaire. We are actually supported by the state of Florida to give on presentations like this. Part of my salary goes into cultural events, and this is called. So if you'd be so kind to fill it out, we appreciate it. I will scan this in the sign-in sheet and share it with you. And I've been recording this. It's all the back of your head, so it's all incognito, but it'll eventually be out on the website. Once again, my name's Misha. I'm going to in the back answer any questions you have. If you want to become a member, I have a short and easy method to do right back here. And please support the Orchid Society too, because they're supporting the Botanical Garden.
Monthly meeting tomorrow, 1 o'clock, West Martello.
There you go.
Jose Esposito from Sorrel Orchids will be speaking.
And they always bring examples, folks, so this is always exciting. All right, Leigh, thank you so much. Thanks for really awesome. Thank you, everyone.
They have a big show.
Ready?